Elasticity. Most people think of dopamine as pleasure. That's wrong. Dopamine is not about pleasure. It's about pursuit. It's the molecule of anticipation, the chemical that drives us to act, to chase, to explore. Elasticity. It's what pulls us toward what we want long before we ever get it. The remarkable thing is that dopamine doesn't just respond to rewards, it responds to our relationship with effort. Elasticity. When we learn to associate the process, the strain, the repetition, the uncertainty with the same satisfaction we feel when we reach a goal, we unlock an entirely different kind of drive. That's the essence of a dopamine mindset, not waiting for motivation, but generating it internally by how we think about effort itself. In the brain, there's a baseline level of dopamine, a kind of background hum, and then there are spikes that occur when we move towards something meaningful. The problem is that every spike drops below baseline afterward. That's why after big wins or intense experiences, people often feel flat or unmotivated. The key is to manage those fluctuations. You can't chase constant highs. You have to stabilize your baseline by spacing out rewards, by maintaining healthy sleep, nutrition, sunlight, exposure, social connection, all the things that naturally replenish dopamine systems. And here's the paradox: the more we reward ourselves only at the finish line, the less motivated we become over time. But when we start to reward the effort of, when we tell ourselves, this hard thing I'm doing right now is the point, we train our brain to release dopamine during the climb, not just at the summit. That rewires motivation. You can test this anytime. When you're tired, when you don't feel like doing the work, instead of focusing on the outcome, the grade, the promotion, the recognition, focus on the act of showing up. Tell yourself that each repetition, each sentence, each step is literally teaching your brain to find joy in effort. Over time, the brain starts to crave that state. It starts to see challenge as reward. That's what separates people who burn out from those who sustain momentum over years. They've built a relationship with effort that's self-reinforcing. They don't depend on external hits of dopamine from likes, approval, or validation. They generate it internally by controlling their own narrative about what effort means. So when we talk about drive, it's not about pushing harder. It's about understanding the machinery that makes pushing possible. It's about knowing that the real power lies in how you frame the grind, how you interpret the struggle. Dopamine doesn't just fuel your motivation, it reflects your mindset. Train it right and you can sustain pursuit for a lifetime. Most people go through life chasing dopamine without realizing it. They check their phones, scroll endlessly, refresh notifications, all in search of that tiny surge of satisfaction. But what's happening in those moments isn't real motivations. It's a trap. It's the quick, shallow hit of a system designed to reward anticipation without action. The brain is ancient, evolved for survival and exploration, not for the modern flood of artificial stimuli. When it's constantly exposed to fast dopamine, social media, junk food, quick validation, it adapts by lowering its sensitivity. The same hit feels smaller over time. That's why people lose drive. They're not broken or lazy. They're simply overstimulated and under-rewarded by real effort. The truth is the dopamine system is elegant but ruthless. It doesn't care whether you're pursuing something meaningful or mindless. It just tracks prediction and reward. When the brain predicts a reward and receives it, dopamine spikes. When it predicts a reward and doesn't receive it, dopamine drops. That drop is what we experience as disappointment, boredom, even mild depression. But that dip also carries power. It's the brain signaling that something needs to change, that effort must increase or the strategy must shift. It's a feedback mechanism designed to guide adaptive behavior, not a punishment. The problem comes when people escape those dips with cheap replacements: a snack, a scroll, a drink, a distraction. Each time we do that, we teach the brain that discomfort should be escaped, not explored. Over time, that kills drive. The human brain is wired to work for things. We evolved to track prey over long distances, to endure hunger, to persist through uncertainty. Our ancestors didn't need instant gratification. They needed sustained pursuit. That's why the dopamine system rewards progress, not just success. The chase was the point, the excitement of moving closer, of inching forward. That was the signal that kept us alive. In the modern world, most of us have forgotten that rhythm. We expect the hit without the hunt. We want the result without the resistance. But the brain doesn't function that way. It's built to connect effort to reward, not reward to passivity. When you train your mind to find satisfaction in effort itself, you reclaim the original design of the dopamine system. This isn't about positive thinking or fake enthusiasm. It's about creating a real physiological link between exertion and satisfaction. For instance, if you're training for a marathon, the dopamine mindset isn't about waiting for race day to feel good. It's about learning to find that chemical reinforcement during every training run, especially the painful ones. It's about associating fatigue with progress, discomfort with growth. When that happens, you stop needing external rewards to keep going. The effort itself becomes intrinsically motivating. Neuroscience shows that dopamine is released not only when we reach a goal, but when we believe we're making progress toward it. That belief is critical. It means your perception of effort can change your brain chemistry. If you frame hard work as suffering, your dopamine drops. If you frame it as a signal of forward movement, your dopamine rises. That's the difference between burnout and resilience. People who love the process don't necessarily have easier lives. They've just trained their brains to interpret effort as evidence that they're on the right path. The brain's reward system works in loops. Dopamine motivates you to act. Action generates feedback. Feedback adjusts dopamine. It's a self-correcting circuit. But that circuit can be hijacked. The constant flood of easy stimuli, fast entertainment, sugar notifications, can distort the loop so much that effort feels unrewarding by comparison. You start a project, but your brain compares the slow reward of progress to the instant dopamine of a digital distraction, and suddenly the work feels dull. That's not a moral failure, it's neurochemistry. The solution isn't to rely on discipline alone, but to reset the system. Resetting the dopamine system doesn't mean quitting everything pleasurable. It means recalibrating the balance between effort and reward. That might involve a short fast from high dopamine behaviors, turning off your phone for a day, avoiding processed foods. Skipping short-term rewards, not as punishment, but as a reset. When you remove the constant spikes, your baseline begins to recover. Suddenly, simple things, a walk outside, deep work, conversation, start to feel rewarding again. The system becomes sensitive once more. That's when real motivation returns. Another key element in this process is randomness. The dopamine system thrives on unpredictability. Variable rewards that come sometimes but not always, produce the strongest dopamine responses. That's why gambling and social media are so addictive. You never know when the next hit will come. But you can harness this mechanism for growth. Instead of chasing random dopamine from entertainment, create variable rewards in your own pursuits. For example, allow yourself small, unpredictable rewards for consistent effort. A day off, a new experience, a new challenge. Keep your brain engaged in uncertainty, but in a way that serves your goals. Sleep, sunlight, and movement all influence baseline dopamine levels. Morning light exposure triggers dopamine release through specific neural pathways in the eye and brain. Exercise, particularly intense bursts of effort, increases dopamine receptor density, meaning your brain becomes more responsive to natural rewards. That's why regular movement isn't just about health, it's about maintaining motivation. Similarly, lack of sleep or chronic stress lowers baseline dopamine, making everything feel harder. When people say they've lost drive, often they're just physiologically depleted. The chemical foundation for motivation is missing. But even with a healthy baseline, the mindset around effort determines how that chemistry is expressed. When you frame the pursuit of a goal as a burden, your body releases stress hormones that blunt dopamine signaling. When you frame the same pursuit as challenge and growth, dopamine pathways amplify. It's not magic. It's the result of how cognitive interpretation affects the limbic system. The words you use internally shape your neurochemistry. That's why self-talk matters. Not as empty affirmation, but as a biological tool for energy management. There's also an art to alternating pursuit and rest. Constant pursuit without intervals of recovery eventually depletes dopamine. This doesn't mean you should indulge in mindless rest that creates its own crash. It means strategic recovery meditation, nature, meaningful social connection time, and silence. So these activities restore baseline levels while keeping the system balanced. In neuroscience terms, you're giving dopamine receptors time to reset. The greatest performers across all domains, athletes. Scientists, artists intuitively understand this rhythm. They know when to push and when to pause. That timing preserves their drive over decades. We often think of motivation as something you either have or don't have, but motivation is a dynamic state created by the balance between effort, reward, and rest. You can influence all three. You can choose to make your effort meaningful, structure your rewards intelligently, and design recovery that rejuvenates rather than distracts. When all three align, the dopamine system works as intended. You wake up driven, you work with focus, and you recover with purpose. There's also a social dimension to dopamine. We are deeply social creatures, and our dopamine systems are shaped by status, belonging, and recognition. Social approval releases dopamine, but so does contribution, the act of creating value for others. When we focus too much on validation, we externalize our drive, but when we focus on contribution, on giving effort that matters beyond ourselves, the system rewards us differently. It creates a deeper, more sustainable motivation. That's why purpose is the ultimate dopaminergic amplifier. When your goals align with something larger than yourself, the pursuit never feels empty. It's not about winning anymore, it's about meaning. Now, there's a subtle but important distinction between reward and reinforcement. A reward is something you receive after a task. Reinforcement is what happens when your brain learns to associate the task itself with satisfaction. Most people chase rewards, the paycheck, the recognition, the trophy. And once those rewards arrive, motivation fades. But when you train reinforcement, effort becomes its own loop. You don't need to wait for success to feel good. You feel good while building success. That's what long-term consistency looks like. Not constant enthusiasm, but consistent reinforcement. Think about the moments when you felt most alive. Chances are they weren't the easiest moments. They were moments of effort, climbing, building, learning, pushing beyond comfort. That's dopamine doing its work, not because of the outcome, but because of the forward motion. The nervous system is built to light up in pursuit, not in rest. That's why people often feel lost after achieving a huge goal. The pursuit stops, the dopamine drops, and the brain searches for the next climb. Understanding this prevents the crash. You realize that fulfillment isn't found at the top, it's sustained in the climb itself. To cultivate this mindset, you can use deliberate strategies. One is micro goal framing, breaking large, distant outcomes into smaller, achievable steps. Each step creates its own mini dopamine spike, keeping the system engaged. But you have to be careful not to reward yourself too early or too easily. The brain learns patterns quickly. If you celebrate too often, the spikes lose their value. If you never celebrate, the system fatigues. The balance lies in spacing rewards intelligently enough to reinforce effort, not enough to replace it. Another strategy is embracing friction. When something feels hard, your instinct might be to avoid it, but that's exactly when the dopamine system is primed to teach resilience. When you reframe friction as feedback, as evidence of growth, your brain rewires. You begin to crave challenge because it becomes synonymous with progress. Over time, what used to feel like strain begins to feel like flow. That shift is powerful because it turns effort into energy. The brain doesn't distinguish between physical and mental effort in terms of dopamine release. Both can train the same circuits. This means studying, solving problems, or building new skills to be as stimulating to the dopamine system as physical training if approached with the right mindset. The key is novelty and challenge. The brain craves learning because learning signals adaptation. When you stop learning, dopamine levels drop and life starts to feel flat. That's not a lack of excitement, it's a lack of expansion. The antidote is curiosity. Curiosity is pure dopamine. It's the brain's way of exploring uncertainty with excitement rather than fear. Children live in that state naturally. Every question, every new discovery lights up the reward system. As adults, we often lose that spark because we trade curiosity for control. We stop exploring and start predicting. But the most driven people maintain curiosity well into adulthood. They treat every unknown not as a threat, but as a potential source of dopamine. They stay learners, not just doers. There's also a biological rhythm to dopamine that aligns with circadian cycles. Levels tend to peak in the morning and decline gradually throughout the day. That's why the early hours, especially after light exposure and hydration, are ideal for hard cognitive or physical work. Aligning your effort with your biology multiplies your drive. If you try to force peak focus at night, you're working against your chemistry. The brain likes rhythm and predictability. It rewards consistency. And yet, within that rhythm, variability keeps motivation alive. That's why occasional challenges, new environments, or unexpected experiences reignite drive. The system needs both structure and surprise. Too much structure leads to stagnation. Too much surprise leads to chaos. Balancing the two is an art, the art of sustainable motivation. When you combine these insights, effort as reward, variability, curiosity, rhythm, you start to experience drive differently. It stops feeling like pressure and starts feeling like purpose. You begin to understand that dopamine is not the enemy of discipline. It's the foundation of it. Discipline is just dopamine trained to align with long-term goals instead of short-term distractions. Every time you resist a cheap dopamine hit and choose effort instead. You're literally strengthening neural circuits that make future effort easier. That's neuroplasticity in action. The brain rewiring itself to prefer the harder path because it's more meaningful. And the more you practice this, the more subtle the rewards become. You start to enjoy silence, focus, repetition. You start to feel satisfaction not from novelty, but from mastery. Plasticity, you start to crave growth rather than validation. That's when you know you've shifted from being a consumer of dopamine to being a controller of it. That shift is freedom, the ability to choose what drives you rather than being driven by whatever stimulates you. It's not about suppressing pleasure, it's about directing it. It's about understanding that the ultimate form of motivation is not external excitement, but internal clarity. When you see effort as pleasure and pursuit as reward, dopamine stops being a trap and becomes a tool. That's the essence of a high drive mindset, to be in control of your own pursuit circuitry, to choose what to chase, and to love the chase itself. The molecule doesn't change, your relationship with it does. And when that happens, the entire texture of life changes with it. So in the end, everything comes down to this dicity. Dopamine will follow whatever story you tell yourself about effort. If you tell yourself the work is suffering, your brain will make you suffer. Dicity. But if you tell yourself that effort is the gateway, that every repetition, every late night, every challenge is literally building the circuitry for your future self, then dopamine becomes your ally. Dicity, not your enemy. Drive is not a gift, it's a practice. It's something you cultivate by choosing to love the climb as much as the summit. Dicity, you can either let dopamine pull you toward distractions and fleeting highs, or you can train it to fuel your pursuit of growth, mastery, and meaning. The choice happens every moment in how you think, ticity, and what you focus on, in how you define reward. When you learn to find joy in the process, you'll never have to chase motivation again. Dicity. You'll become the kind of person who wakes up already moving forward because your brain has learned the deepest truth about fulfillment, that the pursuit itself is the reward.